Hello, Book Two. I had an actual social call this morning. Not appointments that I didn't want to go to, but an actual social call. So, despite the fact that it's really humid here in Boston, I think ahead of maybe a slight brush of rain, and despite the fact that I had an adorable dog at home, it's you, baby, you're the adorable dog. I went. I went on this social call. I have a friend who runs a church in Boston, and I went to see him. Simple as that. I went to see him, talk with him. I folded in a few minor voluntary errands along the way, but it was mainly that. It was mainly to go and see him. And he has actually come up on this channel before because in pre-pandemic days, he ran a charity event, a regular charity event for his church where members would donate lots and lots of stuff, and they would try to raise money for the church. And a lot of the stuff that was donated by those members was books. And he would always ask me either to come to the charity event ahead of time and just take whatever you want, because not only because he and I are friends, but because he thinks that I have done things for him that deserve repayment. It's not exactly how it works, but he will often say for services rendered, and I know that's a touchy phrase when uttered in the Catholic clergy, but nevertheless, I would always go either before the event or after, when the event would be over, and he'd say, "Well, I've got a whole bunch of books left over, and I don't know what to do with them. You can, no matter what I do with them, you can certainly come and take your pick." Those days have largely not comfortably returned. But the books have continued to flow in. So while we were chit-chatting, it came up that there were lots and lots of books in boxes in the basement. And that if I wanted to, I'm perfectly happy to pick as many of them as I want and just walk away with them. Again, for services rendered. In this case, the service is the church bulletin. The church has a little, I'm sure you've seen it, a little, the kind of thing I'm talking about, a little folded page amateur printed bulletin that goes out to the parishioners. And it partly includes schedules and announcements and that sort of thing, but there's also room for and the expectation of prose. And my friend is the one it's expected will write the prose. And let's just say, when it comes to him putting pen on paper, he is not divinely inspired. Let's just put it that way. let's just say that. He can do it. He can labor his way through it, but it's not divinely inspired. And honestly, in all fairness, penance should be meted out in the confessional, not in the prose of the church bulletin. So he has asked me from time to time if I would be willing to generate that prose myself. And ordinarily, I would consider that something of a black hole because this is just a printed bulletin. Of course, this church does not put the bulletin online in any form. Of course they don't. I'm sure there's nobody there who would even know how to do that, even if they wanted to. So the prose that I generate is literally going down a black hole. It's going to a few hundred parishioners, and that's it. And they're not keeping those things. No one's keeping those bulletins. So nevertheless, and of course it's not paid. Of course, it's not. I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask for payment for a favor to a friend. So, for many of these bulletins, I have written two things. One is sort of two different. I don't know if you'd call them columns. They take up two different parts of the bulletin. One is religious news, a little column about religious news in which I talk about major religious news items in the news that day for the world, but I also bring the concentration in to Roman Catholicism. So there's that, news, religious news, and then there's also meditation on a biblical passage, which you would think would explicitly be my friend's job. But nevertheless, I don't just love reading biblical exegesis, I love writing it. And I ran the first few by him for doctrinal soundness, and so I do that as well, where I pick sort of I don't even know what you'd call it, maybe a homily, maybe something like that. But one way or another, I've been doing that, and I've been enjoying it. And today, this morning, he said, well, for that, why don't you take as many books as you want? I reassured him that I wasn't doing that in order for any kind of repayment. I reacquainted him with the biblical passages that say that giving is supposed to be done without the expectation of receiving. And then I said yes, because you're not going to tempt me with a basement full of books and have me say no. I'm not going to turn that down. I'm not going to turn down free books on principle. So I rooted around in the boxes and on the tables, and I found there was a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff. But I found a pile of stuff, and I was telling myself the whole time, well, you know, it's really humid, and it's not all that hot here, but you'll really, I only had myself and one shoulder bag. I was telling myself, you'll really pay for it if you try to lug too much back home. So keep this pile that you're building under control. And then it became less controlled, and then it became out of control. And I eventually said, my friend came down at one point and said, how's it going? You know, any gems, anything that we should know about? He always asks me that because if there's a gem, maybe we could, you know, sell it to Ken Gloss over at the Brattle, or put it online or something like that, and generate actual funds for the church, which is something the charity event seldom does. Let's just put it that way. It seldom does. But I told him, yeah, I found a lot of stuff. In fact, I found too much stuff. And I pointed to the pile that I had, which was, you know, yay tall and more than I could carry comfortably. And he said, "Oh no, well take as many as you want, because my sacristan I can part with him for an hour to send you back. He can help you to carry stuff back." And I thought, oh great, so you're gonna lend me a grizzled fossil who's older than I am in order to help me lug books. And then the sacristan made his appearance, and a hymn of angels began to sing from Handel's Messiah, because this was a new sacristan in every possible way. He was 22 years old and apparently splits his time fairly equally between God and free weights. So there was no trouble about overburdening an old fossil with a bag of books. So I got to on the way here, I got to know that sacristan. That's a lot of fun. It'll be great fun to email with him and find out. Embracing, as I don't need to tell a lot of you, embracing a religious life in the 21st century is in itself an act of bravery in a large part of the world. And the parts of the world where it's normal, accepted, and not an act of bravery are not parts of the world or parts of America where you want to be. Especially if you're going to do, like, for instance, Christianity right. If you're going to do Christianity right, instead of some self-serving mega tent revival church Bible Belt version of Christianity that just is your way of justifying raising rents. If you're going to do it right, it requires an enormous amount of counterintuitive thinking, to put it mildly, in the 21st century. So it's going to be fun to correspond with this young man, to email with him about all sorts of stuff. And I thanked him elaborately for helping to bring back these books. And so I have a stack of books to show you that is slightly taller than my normal stack, although only one hardcover. And it's the first thing, and it's a tiny little hardcover. It's going to need a little bit of tender loving care to get it back into any type of reading shape if I'm going to save the dust jacket, and I do want to save the dust jacket. This is the hardcover of the Viking Portable Thoreau, which has all of Walden and then a whole bunch of other stuff, including, if I remember this volume correctly from the paperback, a really knowing collection of letters. A small selection, but still. And this is Carl Bode, who did the editorial job here, along with Malcolm Gladwell, or Malcolm Cowley. And this is he was a Thoreau scholar forever and ever, just an eminent Thoreau scholar. And I had the mass market paperback of this Viking Portable forever and ever, and I want it again. I don't have it now, but I want that mass market paper. The mass market paperbacks of the Viking Portables were done in a very distinctive way, and I loved them. I was happy to take this for free, and I will reinforce this cover, but I will always be on the lookout for the mass market paperback. And in case you're having trouble picturing that mass market paperback, it looks like this. This is the Viking Portable Shakespeare, with the mythical birthplace on the cover. And this is what they all look like. The Viking Portable as the title with the penguin logo, and then a small inset box of a portrait of the author, and then a slightly fuzzy, slightly out of focus cover photograph. I used to have 2 whole bookcase shelves full of these things. They're wonderful. And I slowly but surely got rid of them. I'm not exactly sure why. They can't have all gone out to other people, but I'm slowly but surely hoping to find them all again. I think they're terrific, even when I have, as is the case with Thoreau and the case with Shakespeare and the case with a lot of these people, even when I have the unabridged works, I still love these Viking portables. And this, of course, was on my mind because I know you're up to your eyeballs in BookTube events, but right around the corner is an oldie but a goodie, a venerable BookTube event. What was previously called ShakeTube is now called Shaketember, and is right around the corner. It's just 3 weeks away until myself and a bunch of other great booktubers celebrate Shakespeare all month long and invite you to do the same. So I mean, I don't have this. I didn't have a copy of this, so I would have grabbed it anyway. But Shaketember is nevertheless right there. Then we have a couple of mass market romance novels. A little shout out to my sister from another mister, my spirit animal up there in Canada, Sarah, the Bookish Knitter. Has a great BookTube channel that I always leave a link to her channel when I mention it. I'll try to remember to leave a link here as well. And I always tell people, when I leave that link, I always tell you when you're listening, I always say, it doesn't matter. She is a romance booktuber. And I always say, it doesn't matter if you don't like romances. It doesn't matter at all. Go and sit down and spend some time with her. Listen to her chatter about books. Listen to her laugh and nose snort at her own jokes. Just watch the way she booktubes, where she sits down and just talks to you about life and setbacks, including an enormous life tragedy that happened to her just last week. Her enormous cat, Goran, the beast, a huge black cat, 3 times Frida's weight, sickened and died. He was old, but he wasn't prohibitively old, especially for cats. It just underscores, you could hear it in Sarah's voice when she talked about it. I wouldn't have had the strength to make videos so soon after myself. I guess that she, like I, draws strength from talking with her friends on BookTube. But the tone in her voice was when she made her video on the subject relayed far more than even her words on the subject, which is, this is what it can be like. Goran seemed just fine one Monday and was gone the next. And that can happen. That has happened to me many times. It didn't happen to me with my previous 2 dogs. My previous 2 dogs weakened, sickened, lingered. So I had much more time to prepare mentally than Sarah did with Goran. Certainly. I mean, she had no time at all to prepare. Whereas with my girls, I knew what was coming, and I knew roughly when it was coming. And I knew perfectly well when Lucy, my Basset Hound, died, I knew perfectly well that my pointer, Malin, would not live for long. And she didn't. But there's an element, as tragic, as painful as that is, there was at least an element of ground softening that Sarah didn't get with Goran. But anyway, she tells you all these things on her channel is just like this one, where you're sitting down with another bookish person. And even if you don't read romances, I have had many, many people follow the link to her channel and say, come back to me in an email and say, boy, were you right. I'm not interested in romance at all, but I never miss an upload of hers. I never miss a video. I never miss visiting with her. Entirely right. And I'm not saying that Sarah doesn't have any evil ulterior motives, because quite a few of those people have then gradually, over the course of watching a few of her videos, decided maybe they'll give a romance a try. So mission accomplished on both ends. I think this is a contemporary romance writer. Sarah and a few other BookTube romance channels have done a lot to woo me away from only reading historical romances, especially only Regency romances. I admit, for a long, long time, even after the scales fell from my eyes about romance novels and how you say more about yourself when you're snobbish about them than you say about them, even after that, for the longest time, I only really read Regency romances, only then. And gradually, over the course of time, I have realized there's plenty of fun to be had in contemporary romances as well. And this author is one of the queens of contemporary romance. This is Jill Shalvers. I got 2 of her Heartbreaker Bay novels. Wrapped Up in You, which I think I got from the publisher. I wasn't spending any money on these things, so I wasn't all that choosy. It wasn't a question of me saying, well, I think I already have a copy of that, so I won't get it, because it wasn't any money, and it also wasn't any labor. I had it, and enormous set of shoulders to help carry the load. So if I do have a double of this, that's fine. I'll go looking in my contemporary romances. But there's Wrapped Up in You. There's the front cover, and there's the step back, the fully lit Christmas tree. And then Sweet Little Lies, also a Heartbreaker Bay novel. Not sure if I have this one either. This one has seen some love. And it also has a step back of these two on the beach with the only character in the book that I'm sure I will be really interested in walking with them. So I got 2 Jill Shalbert's romance novels. Always great. And then we have trade paperbacks all the way to the end. So we have a trade paperback of Cy Montgomery's Good Good Pig. Cy Montgomery wrote Soul of the Octopus. A lot of you will know this author, but maybe not from this book. This book is wonderful. It is, it'll break your heart at the end. You'll bawl at the end of this book. You absolutely will. But it is the story of her adopting an enormous pig. Not a fashionable mini piglet or anything like that, but a huge factory hog. And what is they name him Christopher Hogwood. And you learn to know him while she and her family are learning to know him. You learn what he's like. And that lodges this firmly in the subgenre of natural history books in which a human comes to live with an animal who's not a dog or a cat. You could also broaden that category to include dogs and cats, but you know what I mean, where someone adopts a bluebird or a blue jay or a starling or a squirrel or a pig or a bat or an owl, and writes essentially what it's like to share their world, to encounter their world. One of the newest examples of this where there's no adoption involved, but nevertheless a friendship, is Fascinate by Catherine Raven, which is a brand new book in hardcover I cannot recommend strongly enough. And this is the same thing. And every time I get a copy of this, I give it away to somebody because it is sure to work. It's sure to please and also touch. It will touch you. This next one is New Testament scholarship by a guy who, if I remember correctly, was the absolute dean of New Testament scholarship, F.F. Bruce. This is his book, New Testament History. Was a prolific and extremely well-respected New Testament scholar. I believe the sort of elevator pitch of his approach was that he put a lot of emphasis on the historical reliability of the New Testament. So in other words, he and I would be in different ideological camps. Most of the history in the New Testament that the writers of the New Testament include, they get wrong. Most of it. I'd say 90% of it they get wrong. So they are using, in my view, in my interpretation, the New Testament writers are using history as window dressing. They aren't actually grounding anything in history. And maybe that signals that they're not writing to anybody that they expect will be able to contradict them. One way or another, F.F. Bruce had a different opinion and was a terrific writer. One way or another, a terrific writer, a terrific marshaller of sources in and outside of Scripture. I don't think I've ever talked with Mark Richardson or Jason Harrigan about this author. Probably they both knew him. It just tends to be the way. But one way or another, I have no other of his books. You could fill a whole bookcase with his books. But I have only this one. I was happy to see it, especially happy to find it in the basement of a church. That somebody out there is reading F.F. Bruce, even though, would I be wrong in saying, I'm not, I'm pretty sure that almost all the people that I'm listing here are still alive, but some of them won't be, and I always get caught up in the comments field or in emails by people pointing out to me that someone I confidently said was dead is still alive at the age of 150 or whatever. But one way or another, I'm pretty sure that F.F. Bruce is not in print anymore. Pretty sure you can't find this guy's work, and he wrote a lot of it. Anyway, this next one, you will certainly be able to find multiple copies in your library, multiple copies in your used bookstores, multiple copies in your retail bookstore. This was a fiction debut such as all wannabe writers dream of deep in the night. And almost none of them ever get it. And for you to get a welcome like that is one thing, but for it to be deserved is something completely else again. And yet, this is a case of that. This is Stephen Markley's debut, Ohio, his debut novel, Ohio. This has a little bit of church smudge on it. There's a lot of these things are going to need cleaning with a warm cloth, a warm, damp cloth. But that's okay, because as soon as I saw this, I realized that I got the advanced copy of this. I got the finished copy of this. Never got a paperback, which is what this is. This is a trade paperback release. And I got rid of the advanced and the finished copy. But not before I read it loved it and ranked it extremely highly. In fact, I think this was number one on the fiction debut list for Steve reads at the end of the year for this year, 2018. I'm pretty sure it was number one. Small town life. No matter where you live, no matter where you come from on the spectrum of small town life, you will instantly recognize it here, and done without condescension, which is really nice, because usually if you're going to read about American small town life, especially in the Midwest, in a novel in the 21st century, you're going to read about it marmaladed over with condescension, and there isn't any here. So I loved it. It was fantastic to see it in paperback like that. And the paperback is actually the form that I would like, because the hardcover that I got and the advanced copy didn't have anything like the page after page after page of glowing superlative blurbs that start this off, that remind me that every once in a while the literary book chat world does come together on a book. Every once in a while that happens. It's not common, but it every once in a while it does. Then we have nonfiction, and not only nonfiction, but a book for my books, about books, my literary criticism bookcase. This is James Wood. A lot of you will know him because he wrote a book, How Fiction Works. Then got a 10th anniversary reissue in paperback. And this is the fun stuff and other essays. This is him writing about, this is occasional work. So it's him writing about The Road. This has his review of The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It has his review of Robert Alter's translation of the Bible, and a whole bunch of other stuff, along with his ruminations on slightly older stuff as well. The fun stuff, I think, being a reference here to stuff that you're doing because your own whimsy takes you there. The stuff that you're reading and then writing about because your own whimsy takes you there. As a writing poobah of James Wood's stature, I'm not sure what reading he does that isn't like that, but nevertheless, what else have we got in here? He writes about this is such a great volume. I've had it before, but it writes about Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, Sebald's Austerlitz, King James Bible, Edmund Wilson, The Road. He writes, this is his piece on War and Peace. He has a piece in here on Marilyn Robinson. Great. Fantastic. I've had this on and off over the years, but now I have it again. I'll reread bits and pieces of it, and then, well, I won't put it on that bookcase, because that bookcase is going bye-bye. Because once Operation Harrigan is in full swing, all of the books here are being rearranged. Almost all of them. A few islands of sanity in the little book room, and otherwise everything getting rearranged, so that the books make sense, so that their placement makes sense, so that nothing is overcrowded, so that I can see everything. It's a long plan. I'm not going to exhaust myself on it, but it is going to happen. And once it happens, my extremely overcrowded book literary section will not be a problem. I will, if necessary, I will devote a whole wall to those kinds of books. I love them, so it'd certainly be warranted. But I am going to first clear off a lot of books so that I have room to maneuver, then seriously think about and do some measuring about where categories should go according to the size of that category. B. What are you doing? What are you doing? She gets the lickies. Then I don't know what's going to go on, except that she's going to barf it up on me. Anyway, this next thing is fantasy novel by an author that I have liked. I met him a couple of times. I'm sure that one of you is going to tell me that he's still alive. I'm under the impression that he's dead, but one way or another, it doesn't matter, right? This isn't the obituaries. After all, this is a book haul, not the Irish racing pages. This is Dave Duncan. I've read a number of his books. I've never liked really any of them. Never disliked them. They're good, but none of those ever had that snap, that magic that I want. And this is set in Venice, so if anything will. This is The Alchemist's Apprentice. Set in Venice, in which I believe Nostradamus plays strongly here. Young swordsman Alfeo Zeno is Nostradamus' apprentice and protector, and his days are spent poring over astrology charts and making calculations, his nights learning arcane magic or transcribing Nostradamus' nebulous prophecies, until one night the Council of Ten arrives to take the seer into custody. And then Alfeo is on his own and has to figure out what's going on. I don't think I've ever read this. This does have some church dirt on it. This is from 2007. So I would have been just getting back into the book reviewing world. It's possible that I might have been able to request a copy of this at the time, but I don't think I did. I don't think I've ever read it. I think I would remember if I did. So we'll give Dave Duncan another try. Then we have something for the gays. We have a block of books for the gays. You should have to do something for the gays. And I was amazed to find in the basement of a Catholic church a block of old gay fiction. Every single one of which is written, I believe, by a survivor. I don't think, I'm rather jubilant in thinking that all of these authors are still alive, which is saying something, considering the decade that they and I lived through. The first one is Greg Herron. You maybe won't know the name, but Greg Herron got canceled before getting canceled was cool. This is his book, Timothy. This is a new cover. I don't believe that the cover looked like this when I first read it. The memory of Timothy haunts every corner of Spindthrift, the beautiful mansion on the Atlantic shore. His face was flawless, his body breathtaking perfection. Everyone who saw him loved him, desired him, wanted him, whether they first laid eyes on him in a magazine ad or on a billboard or on a box of underwear. No one ever forgot him once they had passed through his orbit. They remembered his wit, his intelligence, his sense of style. He was the perfect match for wealthy Carlo. Spendthrift was the perfect backdrop for the glamorous couple and the unforgettable, fabulous parties they hosted there. But then tragedy took Timothy, and darkness descended on the beautiful house on the beach. Carlo closed the house, and its secrets remained hidden. I remember this book. This would have been from 2010? 2012. And I liked it a lot. Never thought I'd countercopy again. It was wonderful. And then all three of these are much older. Much older. This is David. I don't think any of these are debuts, but they're all close. All these authors are prolific. They've all these next three, they've all gone on to do, you name it, produce movies, star in movies, Broadway shows, off-Broadway shows, nonfiction, literary criticism, fantasy, you name it, and they've gone on to do it. But they all had a long publishing career, and I'm pretty sure that all three of these books are early in those respective careers. First is David Plant, who we saw because I got a big volume of his diaries called Becoming a Londoner, which I've been dipping in and out of and just loving. This is one of his novels, one of his early novels, The Catholic, about a young man who is in the 1980s, I believe, although the novel, I think, takes place in Boston in the 1960s. Yeah, the book came out in the 1980s, I feel certain of it. You've got this plume design that only happened in one particular era. Yes, 1985. This plume design, for a while, that on the spine of a book, if you were browsing in Glad Day bookstore or whatever, that was going to tell you, or if you were browsing in a mainstream retail bookstore, that would tell you that the book was a gay novel. And they a lot of them in the early years had these sort of airbrushed photos, these soft focus airbrushed photos on them. You see these in the Men on Men anthology series as well in the early volumes. But this is, let's see here. Daniel Francor is a young man uneasily aware of his gay sexuality, a sexuality both nurtured and tormented by his passionate religious feelings. In a bar, he meets Henry, a stranger with whom he spends a night of the most intense and compelling erotic exploration, depicted with a blending of graphic detail and poetic feeling rare in fiction. I would totally agree with that. Set against the backdrop of Boston in the 60s, this remarkable novel is a brilliant and startlingly honest exploration of spirituality and passion, guilt and eroticism, exegesis and obsession, and of the painfully conflicting demands and constraints they impose. It's not an easily reducible novel. I read it when it first came out. I read it after that, and I'm up for a reread. Absolutely. It is a tough, searching novel. It's not easily reducible. I really like that about it. Then this next one, also early in its author's storied career. This is Horse Crazy by Gary Indiana, also a plume paperback, also with an airbrushed photo on the cover. Let's see here. I had always wanted someone to take control of my body and soul, rule my life, fill my consciousness to the exclusion of everyone else. So states the hip, moderately famous New York arts writer who narrates this provocative, funny, touching novel. For him, it is an obsession at first sight when he meets Gregory Burgess, a beautiful younger man, a notorious flirt, a famous heroin addict, and a lover of women, the absolute truth of the last two being in question. Gregory becomes the object of the writer's blind desire. As a former lover lies dying of AIDS, the writer becomes increasingly fixated on elusive Gregory and the mind games that make love crazy or even fatal. I remember loving this book when I first read that. This will also be, I bet, in the early 80s. 1989. So I'm getting a blast from the past here in pre-treatment gay life, when a lot of these books are stalked by the specter of AIDS, but stalked by the specter of an AIDS that couldn't be beaten. And then this last one, I'm pretty sure this author is still alive, and also like these others have branched out into all kinds of art. But this is one of his earliest novels. I don't think it's his first one. I think it might be his second one. And his first one was a drippy affair, so maybe I'm happy about that. This is Christopher Bram. This is Hold Tight, with its inimitable Plume cover. This was one time where the art design people at Plume thought, we shouldn't blur this. for book sales, we shouldn't blur this. Christopher Bram also wrote what I consider to be one of the definitive gay novels of the period, In Memory of Angel Clare, but lots of other great stuff too. Lots and lots. This author's written lots and lots of great fiction, but he hadn't written it yet. This has the zip, the tang of an author who didn't know yet that he had a loyal audience, hadn't built it yet. Let's see here. Hank Fayette, Seaman Second Class, had enlisted in his hometown of Beaumont, Texas, used his shore leave to visit a movie house on 42nd Street, and ended up in a gay brothel near Manhattan's West Street piers. Gone are the days. Gone are the days. Those West Street piers still exist, but it's $800,000 minimum to live there. It was the wrong place to be at the wrong time, when this big, lanky blonde with a country boy's drawl couldn't fight his way clear of the shore patrol who had raided the place. He figured he was on his way to a brig or dishonorable discharge. But in 1942, a few months after Pearl Harbor, the Navy was more interested in capturing spies than in punishing sex offenders, and he was just the kind of sailor they had in mind. I love this book. I don't know how many times I've read it, but I don't have a copy. The minute I saw it, I realized I didn't have a copy. So I loaded it on the pile. I loaded it onto my beast of burden, my sacristan beast of burden. Then this next one is Peer Pressure at its most corrosive. The cool kids in our little corner of BookTube, I'm not sure you're aware of this. Maybe you're too cool for them. But the cool kids in our little corner of BookTube started hauling Norton Critical Editions. I felt left out, naturally. So I was happy to find one of my own. Norton Critical Editions are they're trade paperback volumes where you get the text up front and then critical essays in the back, analyzing the text, responding to it, the original sources of the text, whatever it is. And in this case, it's the Norton Critical Darwin. So this is actually a Norton Critical Edition that I would want. I wasn't just getting it for the peer pressure, because Darwin wrote, 6 big books, and they do go on. They do go on. He, among the 6 books, of course, was the second most influential book in human history. The first being the Bible. The second is On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. That is the second biggest, most influential book that a human being or human beings have ever written. And On the Origin of Species is elaborately represented here, but so are a lot of other Darwin books that you maybe wouldn't want to read from start to finish. Right? The expression of emotions in animals it's an interesting subject, but the book is a bit of a slog. The Descent of Man is a bit of a slog. And I remember liking this volume, so I saw it, I grabbed it. What do we have here? Does this actually tell us? I had to check. One thing you're going to notice from other people who get Norton Critical Edition secondhand, it's a very good piece of advice. You'll hear it. Mark Richardson will say it all the time. If you see something like this and you're thinking, oh great, here's a Norton Critical Edition of the kind I've heard so much about, you got to scrutinize it carefully for highlighting, obnoxious, deal-breaking highlighting, because these things are used in schools. As you can tell by the fact here that this has a school-style used sticker on the back. Not just a sticker on the front where a used bookstore would put its price. This is when school bookstores have their buybacks, where students can go and get, with a straight face, they can be told, I'll give you 3 cents for this book that you paid $35 for. And they wait in line to do it. When schools do that, they slap one of these obnoxious stickers on here so that it can go into the used section of the school bookstore and not compete with the new edition of this in the school bookstore for the latest curriculum. Which is why when you see these big things like this, these big U stickers with the barcodes on, these are virtually impossible to remove. The one or two that I have here, I have given up and simply putting Superman or dinosaur stickers over it, rather because it doesn't seem possible to remove it. I would give it the old college try here, but I remember loving this volume, and I don't have it, so I didn't have it, so I grabbed it, even though it was peer pressure. This next one is a UK trade paperback, but UK only barely. It is the very polite, very nothing really happening backwater of the UK known as Canada. I recently got a Canadian trade paperback of Wolf Hall and loved it. I loved it. Loved the size. I loved the font factor, everything about it. And when I grabbed this thing this morning, I thought it was just a UK trade paperback. And, you know, we hauled it back here anyway, and I was looking at it and thinking, well, this is an awful nice UK trade paperback. And then I realized it's a Canadian trade paperback, which might explain why it's really nice. This is a book that I believe I have already had, read, and reviewed. But I don't have it now, and I'm happy to have it. It's by Tom Holland, the popular historian Tom Holland. A lot of you will know and like his work. And this is Dynasty, The Rise and Fall of the House of Caesar. This is his sort of biographies and sequence of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Oddly missing the founder of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. There is no separate biography in here of Julius Caesar. Starts with Augustus, then Tiberius, and then Caligula, and then Claudius, and then Nero, and then the curtain falls. Then the curtain falls. After Nero, you get the year of the four emperors, Otho, Galba, Vitellius, and then finally Vespasian. And then Vespasian takes over and tries to start another dynasty with his two sons. And it goes on from there. But the Vespasian dynasty didn't work out that well. I would love if somebody did a book like this on Vespasian and his two sons, one of whom was good and one of whom was rotten. He had a good son and an evil son. And the evil son killed the good son and ruled and was hated by everybody so much that when it was finally time for him to go, there was more chaos. Until the Senate propped up an ambitious but relatively weak old man to sort of be the figurehead of the Roman Empire. Well-connected and scheming and relatively well-liked old man, but not anyone like Domitian, not anyone like a ruthless warlord. But one way or another, this is Holland at his best. This is an author, you'll probably know him for his book Rubicon. That's really his big treatment of Julius Caesar, although I think he could have spared a chapter for Julius Caesar in this book, although Caesar, if I remember correctly, is all over this thing. But this is super enjoyable Roman history, just super enjoyable. He knows perfectly well. Oh yeah, there you go. There's our cast of characters right there, carved in marble. You know perfectly well in a book like this what sources he's using. I know perfectly well what sources he's using, and I know how far afield he's going. A book like this practically writes itself, and that's why you take the advance that you take for it. So if you get a chapter in and suddenly decide you don't want it to write itself anymore, that you want to do a ton of hard research with lots of travel, well, you're not going to decide that. That's what you're going to do is you're not going to decide that. You're going to base this book on a lot of books before it, but not a lot of epigraphy, not a lot of anything like that. You're going to mainly sift the sources that I already know. Fine by me. Absolutely fine by me. Because it's all about how you do it, not about what you base it on. Then this next one is what BookTube refers to as a chunker. The last two in our charity haul are. This one I've had many times before, and I've only read it once. I read it when it first came out, and I liked it. It seemed a little bit throat cleary, a little bit, old man in my day type writing. But I love the author, and I enjoyed the book. And then every other time that I've got a copy since I first read it, I've ended up either reselling it before I read it again or sending it to somebody else before I read it again. This time I'm determined to read it again. This is the big trade paperback of William Manchester's The Glory and the Dream. About 150-year span in American history, in the 20th century. That it's huge. It's gigantic, and this trade paperback has seen better days. I will give this some loving care and attention to make it indestructible, and then reread it. It's long since time that I did. I have a long and checkered history with this author, including reviewing his last book. he was writing a multi-volume biography of Winston Churchill, and announced to the whole world what had been known to his friends and family for a long time before that, which is that he was now incapable of finishing the third volume in that trilogy. That he was incapable of doing it. And for a long time was resistant to anyone else finishing it either. His publishers were fairly explicit about, we didn't sign on so that you could politely die without finishing this volume. We'd like to hire somebody to work with you or to work with your notes to finish this out. Eventually they did. And the third volume in that series is really good. The first two are as well. Manchester has a particular kind of writing diction. You have to get used to it before you'll get used to him. But if you can, and you will, if you've read the book with which he will be synonymous forever will be The Death of a President, about the death of John F. Kennedy. A lot of people I know have also read A World Lit Only by Fire. Is a little off-the-cuff meditation on the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. But it's Death of a President that everybody knows by this author. But I remember liking this. I'm going to give it another try. I'm going to reinforce a paperback and give it another try. And then I will reinforce this paperback as well, because I was 100% sure when I got back here that I already had this. I've had it so many times. I've had so many copies of this. But I looked and looked and looked, and I simply cannot find my copy. Another reason why Project Harrigan must go forward. I simply cannot find my copy. It should be in the little book room, reinforced and in the little book room, but I've looked everywhere, and I can't find it. If I can find my copy, then I have a double, but if not, at least since it was free and since the transportation between here and there was effortless, I grabbed it anyway. And this is the Harvey Mansfield and Delba Winthrop annotated translation of de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Another big chunker. This is my favorite edition of this work, and also my favorite translation. And I love this book. Absolutely love it. I've read it many times. It is infinitely enjoyable. You wouldn't think that if you read a thumbnail description of what it is, a socio-political analysis of America during a certain period as written by a foreigner, the colonial and post-colonial period, you'd think that sounds just about as dry as a book can be without murdering me. But it isn't. It isn't at all. De Tocqueville is thrillingly smart. He's a wonderful writer, and these two really bring that out. And he's also a quality that I'm always surprised, even though I'm aware of it, I'm always surprised when I encounter it. He's also funny. This is a very, very entertaining book. That is the only thing that will explain why a book like this can have such an enormous life. Being dry and dusty won't do it. It has to be that it's entertaining. I make this same point. I know it's a much more of an uphill battle. I make the same point about Edward Gibbon, about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Nobody reads The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire because they have to. They read it because they want to. You might read the first part of the first book because you think this is well known as being, an absolutely epic work of history, just like this. But you won't keep going if you're not entertained. You just won't do it. And you will be. So many, many people have told me that about Remembrance of Things Past. We will find out. I want to recommend this book. I don't know how far that recommendation will go, but one way or another, at your used bookstore or at your library, you will certainly encounter this book. I don't know if you'll encounter this edition, but I saw it there in a box in that basement this morning, and I thought, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100%. I think I have it, but I'm not 100% sure. And then I get back here, I'm looking all around and not finding it. And the books are piled haphazardly here. They are stacked and double stacked. So it's entirely, I've had it happen. It's entirely possible that I'm just looking right at it and not seeing it. The books need reorganizing. They will get reorganizing. Not right away, but they will. I am gradually working my way towards it. But in the meantime, that was a charity book haul for you. It was a wonderful visit. Frida wasn't all that angry when I got back. She's relatively fine being left alone. As long as it's a short period of time, she knows perfectly well when she sees me again if it's been too long. But it wasn't. She was fine. We kissed and made up and then went on a nice long walk despite the humidity. So I'm not regretting it at all. And it was good to see my friend again and chat a little about the bulletin. But anyway, we have Democracy in America, the edition that I really love most, We have The Glory and the Dream by William Manchester, big rambling book of history. We have The Dynasty by Tom Holland in a Canadian trade paperback, the Julio-Claudian Dynasty. We have Darwin in a Norton Critical Edition, my latest Norton Critical Edition. Needs some cleaning up, but I can do that. Then we have a blast of gay fiction from the past. We have Hold Tight by Christopher Braham, Horse Crazy by Gary Indiana, The Catholic by David Plant, and Timothy by Greg Herron. Just a block of fiction for the gays. Then we have The Alchemist's Apprentice by Dave Duncan, fantasy novel set in, I imagine, a slightly alternate version of Venice. We have The Fun Stuff, collection of Deadline prose by James Wood. We have Ohio, Stephen Markley's universally praised debut novel. We have New Testament History by F.F. Bruce. Haven't read this author in forever. It's going to feel wonderful to make his acquaintance again. We have The Good Good Pig by Cy Montgomery, the adventures and life of Christopher Hogwood. We have Sweet Little Lies and Wrapped Up in You by Jill Shalvis, 2 Heartbreaker Bay novels. We have The Portable William Shakespeare from the old Viking Portable line, getting ready for Shake-Tember. And finally, we have the Viking Portable hardcover Thoreau by a great Thoreau scholar. So it's a pile so high it doesn't fit in the camera, but it's getting a lot for me to play with. I will go through these with a warm, damp cloth and clean them up. I will pull any sticker residue off, reinforce the ones that need reinforcing, and then I'll be good to go. I'll be good to play with these. I'm going to give myself 2 hours to play around with these things and see which of them pulls at me the most for a reread tonight. 10-1 it will be Ohio, but you never know. You never know. Could be The Good Good Pig, in which case a part of the evening over there in the little book room with Frida sound asleep, I will be crying. Not that I'm not meaning to make it sound like a downer of a book. It's a wonderful book. But when you're reading a book about of the type I described, about a human who takes an animal into their life, well, unless that animal is a parrot or a turtle, you know what you're going to encounter in that book. You know you're going to encounter not only a hello and a how do you know and a getting to know you, you're going to encounter a goodbye. You know you are. So you just have to be ready for that. And they can be very, very well done. They're not always angry. Like, for instance, Ring of Bright Water, the goodbye is angry. It's rageful. And it should be, considering the circumstances in the book. In others, it's completely sweet and a little bit distant. I am a connoisseur of those types of moments because I've been through those moments in real life more times than I can count. So anyway, that was a gigantic pile of books that were not Brattle books. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. It's gone on way too long, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.